great shape. Just a reminder to you three, you just speak up so that Dr. Yellowhorse can hear you. And we'll reserve about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for Q&A if you'd like for the audience. All right, we're going live now, and we're ready to introduce as you are.
Okay, welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is Nahom Taddessa. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Today's forum is titled, How Can We Stop AAPI Hate and Bias? Research and Policy Perspectives. And we are excited to be joined by some great panelists. Dr. Alexander Hohl is an assistant professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Utah. He has received his BS in Geography from the University of Zurich, MA and PhD in Geographic Information Science from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. His research focuses on computational and statistical aspects of spatiotemporal analysis with application to health and well-being. Alexander currently teaches upper-level classes in GIS, data visualization, and geospatial big data. Senator Janie Iwamoto was elected to the Utah State Senate in 2014. She serves in leadership as Minority Caucus Whip. She previously served on the Salt Lake County Council, where she became the first Asian American woman elected in the state of Utah. Janie graduated magna cum laude in mass communications from the University of Utah and received a JD from the UC Davis School of Law. She practiced law as a partner in a prominent California law firm. She's passionate about criminal and social justice issues, campus safety, and environmental quality. Dr. Aggie Jooyoung Yellowhorse is an assistant professor of Asian Pacific American Studies and affiliated faculty with the Sociology Department and American Studies at the Arizona State University. Dr. Yellowhorse is the Data and Research Director for Stop AAPI Hate. Her research focuses on the social determinants of racial health inequities, community-centered data collection, and critical data literacy. Her current project focuses on Asian American sense-making about race and belonging. Today's discussion will be moderated by Kent Ono. Professor Ono comes to us from the Department of Communications at the University of Utah. His research focuses on rhetoric and discourse, media, film and race, ethnic and cultural studies. He is a past editor of the Communication and Critical Cultural Studies and a past journal co-editor of Critical Studies and Media Communication with Ronald L. Jackson II. He is a past president of the National Communication Association as well. Please join me in welcoming our guests today.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the Hinckley Institute. Many of you have probably been here before, but it's beautiful. And for those who are online, we're in a lovely large room at the Hinckley Institute, room 2018, if you wanted to know. Anyway, my name is Kent Ono, as was said, and we're going to be talking about Asian American hate and research about Asian American hate. And I'm going to start off with a question, and then I'm going to ask each panelist to take about 5 minutes to comment on the question, and then we'll have another question before we have kind of final statements and questions and answers for you. So let me start by asking, given your life and work experience, what do you understand as the roots of persistent and resurgent hate and discrimination against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the United States and in Utah? In light of your work on this issue, what 2 suggestions do you have for how society should work to eliminate racial hate and bias against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders? Please limit your response to 5 minutes. And I think I'll just go to my right and then to their right and then down to Aggie. So let me start with Senator Iwamoto.
And I wanted to clarify that 1 second question was that what can we do as a society? Or
Sure.
Okay. So I just wanted to thank the Asian Center and Hinckley Institute for having us, and Director Kornick, and being with all of these people, I've just met, but I know of their backgrounds, and also Nick Cockrell and others who helped. And I'm a graduate of the University of Utah Department of Communications, and I'm also a product of Hinckley Institute, where I interned both locally and federal and in DC. And I also wanted to just thank for all the students so involved, and we have interns, and my last intern, Angie Zhang, is online, and she was amazing. So couldn't do the work we do without our interns. So one of the things I just, our communities have experienced past discrimination dating back even before the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and World War II incarceration of Japanese Americans, and there was also the murder of Vincent Chin and other things. And it's no secret that discrimination and hate has always existed and continues to exist, but more recent senseless acts have, malicious attacks on innocent lives have resurfaced, and with a vengeance since the pandemic began, with the blame of some words like Kung Flu, like all of we know. And although words are directed at Chinese Americans, it targets them, but it targets the entire Asian American and Pacific Islander community. And I remember when it started, it was very heart-wrenching to see the videos of the brutal attacks on the elderly, like his 84-year-old Thai man, Mr. Ratanapakadi in San Francisco's Anza district. It was nearby where I used to live. And then the recent one-year attacks in Georgia and the killings of 8 lives, 6 were Asian American women. And those losses were, we had the 1-year anniversary, and that is like 68% of these crimes are with women, and that's the intersection of sexism and racism, and a lot on elderly as well. And through the eyes of my parents, who are Nisei, and their parents that are Issei, and before them, I know that as Americans, our personal rights guaranteed under the Constitution can be taken away at any time, and also that history does, in fact, repeat itself. So I just wanted to say that we live in a world of fear, and a lot of this comes from fear of people being different. Last Friday, we had a special session on transgender, and I think fear turns to, hate, and sometimes unfathomable, unspeakable hate. So that was, I think that, and then I just wanted to focus on Vincent Chin, because that happened while I was in law school in the Bay Area, and I knew this woman, Helen Zia, who ended up representing the family. But that moved me deeply, because he was just a good engineering person, and because he was targeted because of blaming the Japanese for the auto industry, and he was viciously murdered and targeted, and that ended up with just a small court fee, and he was on probation for these 2 men, and that started a big civil rights movement there. So and then there was an incident where a Vietnamese boy's grave at UC Davis when I was going to law school, it was splattered with swastikas all over it, and then the wrongful incarceration of 120,000 people, of Japanese Americans. So I think 2 suggestions I see is that Asian American Pacific Islander is a huge, that we see these communities. They're made up of over 60 ethnic minorities and over 100 languages. And so one thing I did during the 2021 first special session is I sponsored a concurrent resolution honoring Asian American Pacific Islander communities, and to tell what the contributions that they've made, and acknowledge the cultural, economic and cultural benefits, and that we stand in solidarity against anti-Asian hate. So I was grateful that they put that on the call. Of course, it's a message, but that we need to do further than that. And then I would also say that words matter. They can lead to, some, like we know, precipitous rise in hate. And also that actions matter, and that if we see actions and behavior like that, we shouldn't stand idly by And so training like AAPI hate, which I did, and I'm glad that they're here to talk about that, implicit bias. And we worked a lot with law enforcement, both local, state, city, and federal, to make sure that we're reporting these things. So those are just some things that I wanted to say.
Okay, it's your turn, Alex. Thank you very much, Senator Iwamoto.
Thank you. Yeah. Also, I am very grateful for the opportunity to serve on this panel. Also, I want to thank all the students that are here in the audience today. I know you're very busy at this time of the semester, and devoting your time to this makes me feel grateful. So again, like the question was, given my life and work experience, what are the roots of the persistence and resurgent hate against AAPI? So for that question, it's important that you know what my work and experience is. And some of my work has included studying hate against AAPI in the social media space here in the United States. And some of the work also that I did included reading what the scientific literature has to say about sources of hate, all right? So the scientific literature, there are multiple theories that I want to touch on, but one common theme is that economic deprivation or economic hardship is one source of hate. And this is a general hate. It's not specific to AAPI, okay? Another source is demographic change. So if there is a neighborhood that experiences an influx of migrants, and again, this is not specific to AAPI, the dominant group feels threatened by the newly emerging group in that neighborhood. That is one theory, and that really speaks to a power differential and between groups. So the literature talks about the dominant group, right, and the minority groups, and the acts of hate crimes, hate speech. They really reflect that there is a group in power that exercises this power towards the minority group. All right. And we, this really speaks to our identity. Who do you identify with, right? Do you identify with a certain group, and what constitutes that identity, all right? Lastly, I think, if you're looking for the roots of racism and hate, it's really helpful to reflect upon your own biases. I'm not free of bias. And I believe that not many people are completely free of bias. And with that, it includes, bias based on race, right? Based on like the physical features of your body that you can see, oh, yes, this person's color of the skin makes her a member of this particular group. I don't think I'm completely free of such biases, but which does not make it okay, right? Which means we still have to work on, addressing our personal biases. So yeah, I also want to say, so this is like the scientific theoretical realm, right, of this issue. Some of my other work has included, as I mentioned, studying hate against AAPI in the social media space. We took a data set of tweets and identified hateful tweets. Senator Iwamoto has mentioned some of these hashtags, right, that were used against AAPI, especially by the highest level of government. And we have observed that in like the trend line of hateful hashtags. We also created a map because tweets, they contain coordinates from where they were sent. And we published this map of social media-based and Anti-Asian Hate, which this study just recently came out. I have a copy of it. I also want to mention that co-authors include Aggie Yellowhorse, who is joining us today through Zoom. You can see her on the screen, and Rich Medina, who is sitting in the back over there. So I want to thank them, and I will just lay the study here. If people want to see the map, it's on the 3rd page, okay? Now, as for recommendations, how society should work to eliminate racial hate, that's a really tough question. So if you're asking about society, that includes AAPI, but it also includes everybody else, right? I really don't have a strong recommendation, except do not hate AAPI, right? Shift the blame for your issues, right? For if you're facing hardship, economic deprivation, shift the blame to who's really responsible to it, right? People in power, not necessarily pointing fingers at other minorities. And then, in general, I think we can do a better job at reducing inequalities, inequities in our society, and fostering diversity and inclusion. Okay, so, and I think each single one in this room either has been in a position or will be in a position where you can make decisions where you can foster diversity and inclusion or not. So have the courage, once you are the boss of your team at work, have the courage to hire diverse candidates. And that, of course, it includes AAPI. None of what I have said is very specific to AAPI. So I apologize for that, but yeah, those would be my remarks on, fostering a society that is friendlier towards AAPI, okay?
Thanks, Alex. And we'll now hear from Aggie, who's on Zoom here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I wish I could be there in person to see everyone's face. Really excited to be here. So as the Director of Research and Data for Stop AAPI Hate, which started on March 2020, through December 31st of last year, the Stop AAPI Hate received about 11,000 firsthand self-report about Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders' experience of hate incidents. Although I really do want to emphasize the sheer number of hate incidents self-report that's been coming, I also want to really acknowledge and appreciate Senator's comment about, this is not the first time in history Asian Americans have really experienced racism. And, although a lot of the discussion centers around interpersonal violence and interpersonal racism or prejudice related to the pandemic and hate incidents, I really appreciate the conversations about how there's been institutional and systematic exclusion and discrimination towards Asian Americans. So for Asian Americans, we are at the same time reimagined as a model minority who really achieved success in the US without help through hard work ethic, family values, also at the same time as the perpetual foreigner who's unwilling to assimilate to US values. So I do think that during the pandemic, we saw a lot of revival of this kind of yellow peril language about, Asian Americans being a threat to Western values, morale, culture, and also public health. Right? So I do think that the root cause, it is not scapegoating in the context of pandemic, but really just to name the root cause. I do think that is white supremacy that really pit against such other racialized group to be situated in this kind of racial hierarchical system in the US. In terms of solution, I coming from an Asian Pacific American study, I do think that education is an important pathway to address hate. I'm not saying that education is the only pathway to address hate. I actually do think that the effort really has to be comprehensive. We have to think about the civil rights issues of Asian Americans, educational equity, also just sense of safety and belonging. So I do think that approach has to be very comprehensive, but I do think that education is a really powerful way to address hate. I do want to introduce this study that was published in Journal of Asian American Study in 2018. Psychologists actually found that people who have taken Asian American study courses, they actually do not have reduction of race-based stress by taking the course, but actually race-based stress was no longer associated with depression and anxiety by taking the course. So to me, I think that means that students are gaining tools to be able to name their experiences and being able to navigate their experiences and to make sense of it through courses like Asian American Studies. So I would like to highlight that I do think that education is a key component of how we could collectively address hate and discrimination. Thank you.
I really like these solutions, policy and introducing bills in the legislature, not participating in bias and treating people in a biased way, and going and taking an Asian American Studies course or getting educated on the subject. Thank you all for our great answers. Now, you may have noticed that we're mostly talking about Asian Americans here. That's the expertise of most of the panelists. There is hate against Pacific Islanders, but we're not the experts on that, but have some knowledge if that is something you end up wanting to talk about. But let me pivot to the second question and the second major question that we have, which is, following what we just heard, are there two things you would want to say to those of us in the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities about what we should be doing to improve the lives and experiences of people in our communities? Please limit your answer to 5 minutes.
Okay, well, I think one of the most important things is that we share our stories. And I was on a panel with George Takei and Kenji Bunch for the Moab Music Festival, and I really loved how his life now is to share his stories from the camp and discrimination. And he did it through cartoon, he did it through a book, he did it through theater and a movie, and this time it was with music. And he's trying to hit all generations of people. And I was really impressed of that's kind of his life goal right now. I too have worked with Japantown for, there was a thriving Japantown downtown between 3rd and 2nd West. And since 2003, since I moved back, I've been working on, just things that we can do. Because that is where a whole community, if you saw how many businesses were there, whole community was obliterated and destroyed, and the efforts, we want to rebuild that and have people know what happened. And never in the time, I represent my my constituents from my district and the state, but nowhere now has my representing people of color. There's only, I think, 6 of us in the legislature or 7, and it really, with the pandemic, getting PPE and just doing that in different languages and trying to reach out and just having embrace the communities. It never resonated with me so much. And there's a saying in Japanese called okage-sama de, and I am what I am because of you. And it tells the cultural story that resonates with all ethnicities, with all of us, but it's important not to forget the past so we do better in the future. So I think we share our stories. Each one of us all have stories, whether we're ethnic or not, we have our stories. And then the other thing I was thinking was, besides that, is sometimes we take these horrific, unspeakable acts that have happened and look to becoming, like I said before, educated and report. I know with API hate, I've even seen it. We don't have accurate reports in Utah. We've been working with law enforcement, but people don't report. I've gotten calls of people calling me, and it's hard because you worry about the retribution of of it when you report. And so it's really apparent with the AAPI community. And I know even for us as a family, I've had threats and I didn't want it to go to my family, you know. And I think those are the most two, and then just getting, that's three though, sorry, politically involved or don't have to run for office. I'd love you to, and I'd help any of you run. But I think just getting involved and just, you know, the solidarity with the communities that are suffering, I think that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I have the exact same 2 points like Senator Iwamoto, but maybe I can present them a little bit from a different angle. So what she said first about telling your story is really important, and you know, create a report, right? Create a record so that people like myself, scientists, can analyze and you know, write studies about AAPI hate. If there's no record, I cannot, you know, I cannot act as a analyst, right? Because it's forgotten. So that's why it's really, really trivially important that there are records of experiences, right? Experiences of hate exist. And yeah, I agree that the Stop AAPI Hate reporting center is a great vessel, right, for where you can create that record, you know, put it on the map, put it in data, right? Create a data set of hate experiences. That is very important because if you want to transpire that to, you know, the policy side of things, the politicians, right, or people in power usually don't make decisions without solid foundations, right? I hope, right? And by, you know, analyzing, creating a science of hate against AAPI, we can, you know, provide a basis for decision making, right? That hopefully results in you know, a betterment of the situation of AAPI in the United States. So the second point about, yeah, you know, getting engaged politically, I would also say vote, right? Vote. I know there has been a lot of noise. I think especially in recent years at the global stage, there are several examples where, you know, countries where people do not have the opportunity to participate in the political process, and it, you know, are much worse off than we are here. So I do encourage you to take the tools that are at your disposal, right, to make things better for the Asian and Pacific Islander communities. You have these tools, right, and you can use them, even though if, you know, in the media or on social media, people tell you that, you know, these tools don't exist or these tools are not effective. So yeah, do go vote. And yes, even more so, like the senator has mentioned, right? Get engaged, right? Be an activist. Yeah, again, I got to say that the question is really tough, and I'm not sure whether I have any more insights on this because, yeah, it is a very, very, very difficult topic, and if there was an easy solution, we wouldn't be talking here. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Alex and Janie. Okay, Aggie, you want to round us out here?
I think we may have a slight technical hang-up. I'm not quite sure what. Sorry, Dr. Yellowhorse, one moment. reboot. It's almost back. Apologies. All right, we're back, I think. All right, go ahead and try and speak.
Okay, hi everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, no, thank you. I really want to echo some of the 2 points that were already mentioned in terms of, you know, how we are represented in data, whether it is the hate incident data or demographic data. You know, there is kind of the assumption that no data, no problem. So I think in addition to kind of the affective impact for storytelling, I do think that there was political implication in terms of how we gather data and tell our story. I also think that being able to get a larger set of data is very important because, you know, I want to emphasize that, you know, within the umbrella of the Asian Americans, there's a lot of diversity in terms of how they came to the US, socioeconomic status, political ideations. So in order to really have meaningful disaggregation, to tell the stories of each of our community, that kind of speaks to the importance of data. I also wanted to echo the civil engagement and voting. So with the Asian American Congress and the Asian American Psychological Association, we did a need assessment survey of the Asian American communities last year. And one of the things that we found is that, you know, after experiencing discrimination and hate incident, people report higher depression, anxiety, somatic symptoms, anger, sleeplessness. But when you actually look at the same mental health indicator over time, the one strong emotion that actually increased over time, anger. So I wanted to kind of think about, you know, how we could use this anger to mobilize and advocate for our community in terms of putting out there to vote, register to vote. And just lastly, I really wanted to emphasize the importance of local community. I know Utah as a state, very similar to Arizona, have experienced substantial, much higher than the US average population growth from 2010 to 2020. At large in the US, Asian American population grew about by 35%, but this is actually by 46% in Utah. So while the population is growing really rapidly in local communities, sometimes that means that some of the infrastructure to really support our community members may not be there. So I think one of the things that we could do, you know, small action is to really support the local community organizations and politicians that really look out for our community and also other communities of color. That, you know, there's different things that we could do at different times. And I think supporting the local community organizations and politicians would be something that I would recommend in terms of what we could do today.
Yeah, there's so much to do, and you all gave great ideas to us to think about. Now is a great time to ask you if you have any questions that we could answer up here. And what I'll do is I'll ask the panelists to raise their hand to see if they want to volunteer to answer the question first. And then at the end, once we're done with Q&A, I'll ask each panelist to give kind of concluding thoughts. But hopefully as you've been sitting there, you've had some questions or had some ideas that you'd like to share.
This is for Senator Iwamoto, but I grew up in the Bay Area, and right now, like, since COVID, we're kind of dealing with, like, our Japantown is fading really badly, so I'm kind of wondered, like, what work you've been doing and kind of trying to revive the one here.
Well, interestingly, I lived for 16 years in the Bay Area, and I just got back from Japantown. And so when we've done a revitalization that I sent over to people that I know in the Bay Area, like I'm on the National Japanese American Historical Society, and I know they've been doing a great job keeping what they can. It was so sad that they have this wonderful manju shop that's been there for 115 years, and it closes on the 31st. And so I went there and I couldn't get in because it was 3 blocks long. But they're doing great efforts. And so we had a renewed architectural design firm that Salt Lake City helped fund. And we do have a new kind of rendition of what we want for Japantown. And it's hard because we only have the Japanese Church of Christ and the Salt Lake Buddhist Temple as the last 2 vestiges of what was Japantown, which was tons and tons of businesses and pool houses and restaurants. And so we don't have much. We're trying to develop the street to make it a place. We're starting that effort right now and love anybody's help on it. You know, we're getting together and we just have been meeting on that. When we did that architectural design, we did look at the Japantowns in LA, San Jose, I think Seattle and San Francisco were kind of the ones that we looked at. And it's a fight no matter what, but it used to be such a thriving Japantown, and we just want to keep it alive and remember our past, and it's so thank you. So I'd like to sign you up to help.
Yeah,
okay.
I'd actually definitely be interested.
Okay, thank you.
Do either of the other panelists have anything to say on that one? If not, we'll go to the next question. Okay.
Hello, I'm also an Asian American student here at the University of Utah, and I was looking through Stop AAPI's database. So of the 10,902 hate incidents reported from March to December 31st, so I think March 2020 to December 2021, 61.8% of those reports were made by women. So you can obviously see the intersectionality of violence against women, but also violence against Asian Americans. And then it comes to a kind of a clear conclusion that there is intersectionality of sexism and racism, which manifests into like more racialized misogyny and then manifests into the violence that we see against Asian American women. So my question is what needs to change in terms of the preventative measures and the responsive measures in this like specific area of racialized misogyny? What needs to change? Is there anything that needs to change in our bystander intervention trainings? Is there anything that needs to change in our anti-racism trainings that specifically targets the racialized misogyny? Is there anything that needs to change in higher education or institutions in order to get to the preventative measures and the responsive measures?
Thank you very much for the question. And I think this one would make sense to go to Aggie first. Aggie, do you want to, I don't know, you haven't had much time to think it through probably, but might you have a response?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. Just to make sure I understand the question correctly, was the question, what can we do to address kind of the intersecting nature of oppression or discrimination experience? Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I do think that Stop AAPI Hate, when it was first set up, it did have a very limited number of questions that really truly doesn't get at the intersectionality in terms of how someone's experience could be at the intersection of race, gender, class, sexual orientation. other kind of social identity. But I do think that as we're thinking about policy and research solution, it really is important to recognize the interlocking system of oppression. So it is not just racism, it's also like heteropatriarchy, it's also ageism, it's also ableism. Those systems kind of interlock to really shape our experiences. So even though sometimes it's hard to show those with data, in terms of kind of how we shape the narrative and discourse, I really value kind of centralizing the importance of intersectionality as we talk about our experiences. And to be quite frankly, I do think that we have a lot of work to do, not in terms of building solidarity with other communities, but also within ourselves. I do think that this kind of Asian Americans, women's experience as both racialized, gender, and sexualized, sometimes I do feel as though we could do better in terms of having these difficult and vulnerable conversations within our community. I'm not sure if I could think of, there's like a one go-to answer, but I really appreciate being able to kind of talk about these difficult topics, because I do think that is like a necessary step for us to collectively think about what we could do better. So thank you for your question.
Yeah, I'd also like to quickly address that. So I'm by no means an expert, right, in intersectionality. And I also fear like, there's no short, fast action, right, that would address it. I just can offer you my perspective as a researcher in this realm of public health and geospatial analysis, right? To me, the notion of intersectionality has not, is up and coming, right? I feel like it is an emerging conversation among scientists, and I don't think it's a very established, topic that has been studied very precisely over decades. I think it is a emerging topic, and I think an incredibly important one. So we cannot study these different phenomena in isolation, right? However, it is from a scientific perspective or from a statistical perspective, it is very hard to incorporate the different such different perspectives. And what you can do, right, to push this angle, right, in the future is, I think here at at an educational institution, if you have choices, let's say what class project topic you want to pursue, or what master's thesis or PhD you want to pursue, that's definitely something that I recommend, right? Going where your heart is, and make intersectionality the topic of your studies. That is one thing that each single one can do. Like, it's such a small, I would say a small step, right? But it is all small steps, and they're important.
I would just say, I know when Vincent Chin happened, the same thing happened, that they'd go after elderly and women. I think they're seen as more, they can take advantage of her. I don't know, I'm not an expert either, but one thing, we have our equal pay is not good here, and I want to thank Tiffany for her involvement in everything too. And one thing that was really important to the Native American community, when last year I did geographical name changes and it started with the word squaw. And listening to the elders and tribal members, how do we, this has never been a word used in Utah, squaw, in the Utah tribes. It's offensive. It may have started off innocently somewhere else, but it's always been offensive to their tribal women and children. And so that, things like that matter. And now federally, they're doing that too. So it's just, I guess, these are steps that are being taken, but your involvement is really important, because a lot of the bills that I get come from communities of color, or I do other things too, but also from students. So your involvement in things that are offensive to you is really important too.
Yeah, and if I can offer, just because I really like your question a lot, and I think it's very important to the purpose of this panel, right? Asking the question, why is it that Asian American women are particularly targeted with violence and aggression in this society so often and brutalized, right? Why is that? That question, just articulating it and then trying to find the answer, right, is kind of the beginning of the kind of work that needs to be done across fields. So whether it's in Asian American studies, sociology, anthropology, criminality studies, right, psychology, and media, which is my field. I think it's critical to understand why it is that this phenomenon is happening. And if we come up with more answers, maybe then we can come up with things we can do. So from a media studies perspective, the representation of stereotypes of Asian American women in history is deplorable in the United States. And it cuts across film and television, the internet, and social media, right? And it's been worse at different times than at others. So following the Vietnam War, the representation of Asian American women as prostitutes was, throughout the society, was a tremendously salient way to configure who Asian American women were. Well, I can safely say that debunking that stereotype and putting out stories and films that show live human Asian American women who do not, who are who they are, right? Regardless of what they do or where they come from. The diversification of images of human beings is part of what's lacking here from a media perspective. And that's something that we as filmmakers, we as people who write, who tell stories, need to do a better job of complicating and putting those stories out there for people to see, to go against the ideas that, whatever ideas they have in their head that are incorrect. Sorry. Are there other questions out there?
I don't need a microphone, just like a quick question. Building off of the question this individual brought up was, I was just wondering why Japantown started fading away in Salt Lake, but also sounds like in the Bay Area as well. Is it like property values going up? Is it because, like, I'm sure there's a lot of things going on and generational changes as well.
When Japantown existed, it was flourishing. It was a one safe place that I know my father and others, Judge Uno is still alive too, to remember. It was a one safe place where the community come together, particularly during wartime and after wartime. And it wasn't valuable property back then. And now it's extremely, and they were told, like Judge Uno said, that the county, went on the county council and partly, but they had said, we're going to move, we're going to do something, build this salt palace. We're going to put it over on 21st. It wasn't in the place they said. And the Japanese community wanted to support growth, but had no idea that it would obliterate the entire community. And there were so many businesses and everything, and there was only two that survived. One was Pagoda Restaurant, which is now not there, and one is a Japanese market that's still there on Main Street. But of that, everything else was gone. So I think economic, and then also never having a seat at the table, because there's been things that have happened every single time, and we've been, just responding and not, and it's happening all over where, and then people wanting that property. So I think it does have to do with economics, because the value of that property now is really, really valuable. And there's always been an effort to get rid of our churches. And not to say that, but, they wanted to purchase those properties for a long time. So.
Yeah, I had a question for Professor Hohl. I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about your paper. How did you select for tweets that contained hate speech, and what sort of findings did you discover?
Yeah, thank you. So, you know that the Twitter offers to anybody to download their tweets, right? And so that's what we did. And the way we identified whether a tweet is hateful towards AAPI or not is through the presence of certain keywords, okay? So we were just looking at the tweet body. And for example, just an example, if the word Kung Flu was present in that text, we deemed it as hateful, okay? And so it's that list of hateful keywords, is like maybe 30 keywords long. And we gathered those from other scientific works that previously had studied this phenomenon. So it's scientifically backed up, right? Now with that, there's it's by no means a perfect way of identifying hate in the social media space. You could think of if somebody tweets something like, "Don't say Kung Flu, it's offensive." We would, our way of identifying hate would fail, right? So I think we were at the very beginning of trying to understand AAPI hate in the social media space. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of night shifts, and a lot of opportunity. Okay, so but this very simplistic manner how we identified hate, that's how we did it. So here to improve on that, the domains of machine learning could really help us have a better classification or a better identification of hate. That's what we're working on. So does it answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like what sort of, you did a geospatial analysis, right?
Yep.
What sort of trends did you find from that?
Yeah, so the distribution across the United States of hateful tweets shows us that, for example, we can see clearly the coastal areas, the population centers, the Bay Area, we can see the Southern California, and let's say New York, right? And coincidentally, that it's where Asian Americans live, right? Where their concentrations are high. I think it does inform, it does confirm some of the theoretical works that that I spoke of earlier. So that there is those are areas where AAPI have reached a critical mass, right? Where there's many AAPI seen on the streets and maybe perceived as a threat. Okay, so with that, also another pattern that we identified is it often hateful tweets stem from these areas, right? But we see a concentration in, let's say, suburbs. We don't necessarily see a concentration in central cities. I'm not sure what to make of this, right? But that you're asking for patterns or trends in the data. So it was really like it was poking my eye, right? That we saw the surrounding areas of these cities, with a very strong signal of hate.
Okay, I think we just have enough time for each panelist to say one thing as a concluding thought before we have to conclude at the top of the hour. So if I can start in reverse, Aggie, do you have a final thought?
Sure. There's so much I want to say, but I think one thing I would say is that, I really appreciate, us having space to talk about these things that are important to our community. I also think that there needs to be institutional and systemic structural support moving beyond this moment So let me just say just quick one sentence. In the 3 decades, the National Institute of Health, only 0.2% of their funding has been allocated to Asian American and Pacific Islanders. So I do think that there needs to be institutional change as an investment into our communities and research and policy so that we could tell stories from our community, from our perspective, for the changes we want to see. So thank you.
Thank you, Aggie. And Alex?
Yeah, I just want to encourage you to take part in this process of, studying hate against AAPI, right? Against, to become an activist, right? I just want to encourage you, don't feel like your actions have no effect, okay? Because they do, because right now you're students, you may feel, right, you're not in power, but you will be in power, okay? You will be the ones that that call the shots. So just keep that in mind, right? If you are frustrated or if you are, you feel like powerless, right? You feel this wall of hate, and nobody does anything against it, right? You can change it and you can rectify the mistakes that have been committed by people before you, and that has happened before, and it will happen again.
Okay, I just I know that we have to fight all the time, and I've had to do that as a woman. Whether it was in my law firm or with the media, how they called me when I won office. I was a homemaker, which is respectable, but I was an attorney, and even recently they never put, without I'm in leadership. There's subtle things that happen all the time, and I won't go through all of them, but I have done a lot for our communities of color and things, and with these tragedies that have happened, I've worked on 3 police reform, and we're lucky to have the police that we have here. Not all instances, there's some, but they want to change the culture, as Chief Valentine said when I did my last bill, and that means that when we protect our police, that means stepping up to intervene and report. There's so many things that you can do, and you are doing. And I want to just tell you that le.utah.gov, you can always, even if you don't run for office, or you can make public comment on a bill, and that's really important to always say that. And there's a virtual option now, so students from when I did campus safety, they're from all over the state were chiming in, which was really important. And so you are the future. Like, I look and think, I used to be you guys, and time goes really fast. So I really think you are a future, and fastest growing, AAPI is the fastest growing in the nation and in Utah. So that we've got to really be wary of that. But I mean, happy, but also hoping that we don't have increased hate here. But thank you so much for having me here.
I want to thank the panelists for wonderful remarks, comments, the audience for excellent questions and attentiveness, the Asian Studies Center and the Hinckley Institute for Politics, and wish you well, and help me thank the panelists one final time.
Thank you so much. We have pizza outside, so please grab a slice on your way out. Thank you.
Yes.
And I'll
Should we turn around, Aggie, so we can make it?
Turn you around so you
Yep.
can take a picture.
Oh.
I'm Pacific Islander.